Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of the 40/40 Vision podcast, the ultimate sports history pod where hindsight is 40/40. We're so excited to jump into today's episode, but before we do, here's a quick word from one of our sponsors. What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of 40/40 Shorts from the 40/40 Vision podcast. Today's episode is a clip from episode 1 of our long form format, where we covered the top 5 what-if moments in Golden State Warriors history. This particular what-if is related to the 1998 draft day trade of Vince Carter for Antawn Jamison. The Warriors had originally drafted Vince Carter and then traded him for his college teammate Antawn Jamison, who played on the Warriors for a few years before being traded to Dallas and making his name with the Washington Wizards. This what if covers in depth the cultural impact that Vince Carter could have had on the Warriors in the same way that he had a huge cultural impact with the Toronto Raptors and is really credited with the spread of basketball in Canada as one of the top sports in that country. We also cover some of the on-court what-ifs where the Warriors could have built, if not a contender, then at least an exciting team for fans in the Bay Area to watch, instead of suffering for 5, 6, 7 years until the We Believe teams captured the hearts of Warriors fans in the Bay Area and the rest of the country. Hope you guys enjoy this one. Let us know what you think. Next up for me is, so the number 5 on my list, I don't think you had this one on yours, was an interesting draft decision in 1999. So this was the draft where the Warriors chose to select, well, they didn't select him, but they ended up selecting Vince Carter and immediately traded him for his North Carolina teammate, Antawn Jamison, who was selected by the Toronto Raptors. So this was an interesting turning point moment for me. I don't know how much of an impact it makes on the team on the court. I mean, Antawn Jamison was, a good enough player. He ended up having a pretty long career in the NBA. He was around the league for, I think, 16 years. He's in the 20,000 point club. So he was a good player. But you could kind of say, but he wasn't necessarily a winning player. And you could say the same about Vince Carter, who went through kind of a interesting transition late in his career, where he went from, I don't want to say a lovable loser, but that's kind of the tag that was attached to him. He was a good player. He was a great showman, but he didn't win anywhere. He went and he had some attitude concerns or some motivation concerns, so to speak. But he transformed his career at the end. He became that lovable old guy that stuck around, and people kind of forgot the weird moments of him, being late or, going to his graduation day of a playoff game and some weird things like that. But what's interesting is what I think this does is similar to the way Vince Carter put the Raptors on the map. I think he would have done the same for the Warriors, because instead of, him doing the famous, it's over after the dunk contest in a Raptors jersey, he's doing that in a Warriors jersey. And what does that do for the cachet of the team, the profile? He was a superstar for a period of time. So that's, I wonder what does that do to the team, and how does that impact, their ability to build a contender in that early 2000s.
Yeah, there's a few what ifs that tie to this, right? Like Vince Carter was super popular, and may have attracted maybe a little more talent. I think as a brand, obviously he was super popular, super exciting, a lot of key dunk moments, right? Especially for Team USA. But I think that I think you'd have to pair this with a couple maybe of our other what ifs in here to make this even more spicy, right? Like if they still have Chris Webber, maybe this is like really appealing, having Vince Carter on the team. Maybe not having some of those bad contracts that made this more difficult long term to sustain. I feel like this would have been mismanaged. That's kind of what might have been the most likely scenario. Like Antawn Jamison was traded away anyway to Washington, right?
Yeah, so they probably, or he's traded to Dallas, and then he ended up. I mean, I think he's most known for being a Wizard. Coincidentally, on the Gilbert Arenas teams, that were spicy in the playoffs. They didn't really win anything, but they were competitive. So you wonder, if they have Chris Webber, they're probably not picking third overall, in this draft. Or fourth overall, I should say. But they could still have gotten Gilbert Arenas, who was a second round pick. And Elvis, you pair Vince Carter with Gilbert Arenas. Maybe you have a little Jason Kidd, Vince Carter,
Mark Jackson.
New Jersey. Yeah, New Jersey Nets type, really exciting team to watch versus, the kind of crap that we were spoon-fed in the early 2000s. So I think that's my thing is they're not winning a championship with those two guys, but I think it does make an on-court difference and an off-court difference in the stature of the franchise and like the cultural cachet, like so to speak.
I think if things fall the right way, even with a little bit of incompetence, that Sacramento LA finals shifts about an hour and a half the other way, and it's in the Bay Area, and it's the Warriors against the Lakers instead of the Kings against the Lakers. I think that's the best case scenario. If things fall into place, you get Mark Jackson in the second round, you get Agent Zero, you get Vince Carter. This is exciting homerism right here. This is where you get super beefed up and explore the best case scenarios. And then the Lakers and the Spurs break your heart anyway in the 2000s. But this is it, baby.
Yeah, nobody's winning a title, with Vince Carter, Gilbert Arenas, but you have a good enough team where it's exciting, where, someone like Jamison isn't asking out after 5 years because he hasn't had a winning season, since he got drafted. So that's the big thing for me is that's the fun thing to think about and kind of the sad thing to think about of, how cool. I mean, Vince Carter was just a very cool player. He, like I said, he wasn't a winner, but he was a lot of fun to have on your team. And that would have been very cool to see.
Yeah. Yep. I couldn't agree more.
As you could tell from the clip that we pulled from that episode, I think we may have focused a little bit too much on the off-the-court impact that Vince Carter would have had, but it's also really hard to overstate how cool of a player that he was. I think there was only 2 years where people would have considered him a top 10 or top 15 player in the NBA, and he was named All-NBA second team in 2000 and All-NBA third team in 2001. But for most of his career, he was at least a above average to even great player in the NBA. He was an All-Star 8 times, though I think one of those may have been one of those Lifetime Achievement All-Stars at the end of his career. But at the very least, you knew that you were getting a dynamic scorer and one of the most athletic players we've seen in the history of the league. The impact that I think he would have had, which I think we covered a little bit in the podcast or in the clip that was shared, really would have been off the court. We saw the impact that Jason Richardson had as a incredible dunk artist and a slam dunk champion with the reputation of the Warriors, with the cultural reputation of the Warriors. And I think he would have had a similar, if not even greater impact if Vince Carter was on the Warriors instead of the Raptors. To this day, we still see a lot of folks wearing that throwback, purple Barney dinosaur jersey with the raptor on the front, the cartoon raptor on the front, and Vince Carter on the back. And I think we would see just as many folks with that cheesy Warriors logo in orange and that thunder type font or lightning type font with Carter on the back. And he would have really just raised the profile of the team, which was kind of an afterthought in the NBA for a long time. They really were, and as we talked about in some of the other clips on the longer podcast, it was really hard to imagine the Warriors, one of the biggest brands in the world, one of the biggest brands in the NBA, being an afterthought. despite playing in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the biggest media markets in the country, they really just were an NBA afterthought for a long, long time. It was where careers would go to die. It was a place where the fans were always there, and the fans always cared, and they had some of the biggest diehard fans in the league, but it was an organization that was known more for failure than anything else. Maybe 40 years prior, people talked about Wilt Chamberlain and Rick Barry and winning championships and things like that. And even in the early 90s, people talked about Chris Webber and Run TMC and all that. But for a solid 10 to 15 year stretch, it was a team that was known for nothing more than losing, being a little corny with their mascot, and just not having any great players or any players really worthy of note until that We Believe season. So it's unfortunate that this happened the way it did, but perhaps we wouldn't have gotten the We Believe teams and we wouldn't have the Warriors as we know them today if Vince Carter was there. But it's still something that's a lot of fun to think about, even if it stings a little bit. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please let us know what you think. Make sure to leave us a review and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. Make sure to follow us on all the major social media platforms at 4040 Vision Pod. Thanks, y'all. Peace out.